The night she came to share good news with her fiancé, what she found instead was betrayal that shattered her heart and a haunting question. Who had really been silently protecting her all these 4 years? As the truth slowly came to light, she realized the cold, powerful older brother had loved her since their school days, content to stay in the shadows just to see her happy with someone else. And when her true identity, a billionaire's daughter, was finally revealed, the one who had once taken her for granted finally understood just how much he'd lost. You are listening to a story exclusively narrated on the Dark Romance Stories channel. Relax and step into the world of love stories filled with mystery, emotions, and passion. Don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment to support us. This content is the property of Dark Romance Stories. Please do not copy or re-upload it in any form. Rain came down over the Upper East Side, like the sky itself was grieving something it couldn't name. It slicked the avenues black and mirrored the neon of shop fronts into long, bleeding smears. Elena Marchetti stepped out of the cab with her collar turned up, a small velvet box pressed against her palm inside her coat pocket, warm from the heat of her hand. She had saved a life tonight. 11 hours in the operating room, a boy of 9, a congenital heart defect that 3 surgeons before her had called inoperable, and she had gone in anyway. Because she had learned long ago that impossible was just a word people used when they were tired. When the monitor steadied into its clean, rhythmic beep and the boy's mother pressed her forehead to Elena's bloodied gown and wept, Elena had thought only one thing. I want to tell Matteo. Not her father, never her father, whose empire of pharmaceuticals had tried to buy her a husband 3 times before she'd run from that gilded cage and remade herself into someone with ordinary hands and an ordinary name badge. She wanted to tell the man she was going to marry. She wanted him to look at her the way he had that first night 4 years ago, when a stranger had cornered her outside a gala, and Matteo Rossi had appeared out of nowhere, all easy charm and white teeth, and made her feel safe. She rode the elevator up to the 22nd floor, with rainwater dripping from her hair. The velvet box was navy blue. Inside it, a man's ring, platinum, understated, the kind of thing she'd chosen because Matteo swore he hated anything loud. A promise she was ready to make out loud, finally, after 4 years of keeping her heart half shuttered. The door to his apartment was unlocked. She noticed it the way you notice a wrong note in a song you love, a small dissonance that snags before your mind catches up to why. Matteo was careful about the lock. His brother had drilled that habit into him. Always lock the door, Matteo, always. She had heard Damiano say it once, in that low, flat voice that never rose and never needed to. She pushed it open. Music drifted out, something soft, something with a saxophone in it, the kind of thing Matteo played when he wanted the lights low. The apartment smelled of red wine and a perfume that was not hers. Heavier, sweeter, a scent she would remember for the rest of her life without ever wanting to. Matteo? Her voice came out smaller than she intended. No answer. Just the saxophone, and beneath it, from the bedroom, a sound she understood before she let herself understand it. Elena walked down the hall the way you walk toward the edge of a cliff you already know is there. The bedroom door stood half open. Golden light spilled through the gap, and in that light she saw her fiancé, the man whose name she had been about to take, whose ring sat warm in her pocket. tangled in the sheets with a woman whose face she didn't know and whose face didn't matter. It was the ease of it that broke her, not shock, ease. The way Matteo laughed against the woman's throat, the way his hand moved like it had made this exact journey 100 times. This was not a mistake. This was not a single night's weakness. This was a habit worn smooth by repetition, a routine, a life he had been living in the margins of the one he shared with her. Everyone knew. She understood that too, all at once in a cold rush. The way his friends went quiet when she walked in, the way the doorman's smile never quite reached his eyes, the way Damiano, always watching, always at the edge of the room, had looked at her sometimes with something she'd mistaken for coldness and now understood was sorrow. She didn't scream. She had spent her life being taught that a Marchetti did not make scenes, and though she had shed the name, some part of that training held her spine straight even now. The velvet box slipped from her fingers. It struck the wooden floor with a small, obscene thud and rolled, 1 revolution, 2, until it came to rest against the leg of a chair. Its lid flipping open, the platinum ring catching the light and throwing it back at her like an accusation. Matteo's head turned. For one suspended second, his face did something complicated. Surprise, then a flicker of guilt, then, worst of all, a kind of resignation, as if a bill he'd always known would come due had simply arrived at an inconvenient hour. "Elena," he started. She was already turning away. She walked back down the hall on legs that did not feel like hers, past the framed photograph of the two of them in Positano, past the coat she'd left here last week, out the unlocked door and into the corridor where the air was cooler and did not smell of another woman's perfume. She did not run. Running would have meant she was fleeing something, and she refused to give Matteo the dignity of being something worth fleeing. She made it to the elevator. She pressed the button. She watched the numbers climb toward her with the patience of the doomed. And in the mirrored steel of the closed doors, she caught her own reflection. Pale, rain-damp, dry-eyed, and behind that reflection, unbidden, a memory surfaced. 4 years of them. Not Matteo's face, his. The night that stranger had cornered her at the gala, it had been Matteo who spoke to her, yes. But she remembered now, with the terrible clarity of shock, that the stranger had already been walking away before Matteo arrived. Walking away with his shoulder hunched at an unnatural angle, as though someone stronger had gripped it and steered him off. She had never questioned it. The time her car had been broken into and nothing taken, and a new alarm system installed the next day by a company that never billed her. The rival hospital administrator who had started asking strange questions about her background, about her real name, about the Marchetti connection, and who had abruptly, inexplicably transferred to Chicago. Each time, at the edges, a shadow. A tall figure in a dark coat, there and gone. A presence she had felt on the back of her neck and dismissed as nerves. The elevator arrived. The doors slid open on their bright, empty box. Eleanor stepped inside, and as the doors closed on her reflection, she finally understood the shape of the thing that had been standing behind her for 4 years. It had never been Matteo who protected her. It had always been Damiano. The Rossi penthouse occupied the top 3 floors of the tower on Central Park West, and from its windows the city lay spread out like something conquered. Damiano Rossi stood at the glass with a tumbler of untouched whiskey in his hand and watched the rain. And he knew the exact moment his brother's life fell apart, because his phone buzzed once against the marble, and he did not need to read the message to feel the shift in the air. He read it anyway. She was here. She saw him. She left. The text came from Enzo, his second, who had a man watching Matteo's building the way Damiano had men watching everything that mattered. And Elena Marchetti mattered more than anything in the world Damiano had built, though he had never once said so aloud. He set the whiskey down without drinking it. For a long moment he did nothing. He was a man who did nothing beautifully. Stillness was his native language, the way other men used shouting or fists. His enemies had learned to fear the quiet of Damiano Rossi more than the rage of any other capo in the 5 families, because his quiet meant he had already decided, and his decisions did not have appeals. But this was not a decision he could make. This was the one thing in his life he had built himself around not deciding. He had loved her for 11 years. He could name the day. September, the first week of senior year, a private academy on the Upper East Side that took the children of diplomats and the children of men like his father with the same discreet indifference. She had walked into the library in a grey uniform with her hair coming loose from its pin, arguing with a teacher about a passage in Dante. Arguing that the poet had been too gentle with the traitors, that betrayal of trust deserved the deepest circle, deeper than violence, because violence at least was honest. Damiano, 17 and already carrying the weight of what he would become, had looked up from his book and felt something in his chest realign like a bone set back into place. He had never spoken to her. Not really. A word in a hallway, a borrowed pen. He had learned her schedule the way he later learned to read a room for weapons, automatically, completely, without meaning to. And he had understood, even then, even at 17, that the road in front of him was paved with things that would get her killed if she ever walked it beside him. His father's road. Blood and territory and the long patience of vengeance. A man who wanted a woman like Elena did not marry her. A man like that let her go and made certain from the shadows that the world was gentle with her. So he had let her go, and then 3 years ago his own brother had brought her home to Sunday dinner and introduced her as the woman he was seeing, and Damiano had shaken her hand across the table and said a pleasure in a voice like a closing door, and had gone to the bathroom and stood with his hands braced against the marble sink and looked at a man in the mirror he did not recognize. He could have ended it. A word to Matteo, a word to their father. He could have taken her. Men in his world took what they wanted, and there was not a soul alive who would have stopped him. Instead, he had done the hardest thing he had ever done. He had blessed it. He had told himself that if he could not have her, then his brother having her was the next best thing, because it meant she would be inside the circle of Rossi protection, and Damiano could watch over her forever without ever having to touch what he had no right to touch. He had been a fool. He had known Matteo was unfaithful within a month of the engagement. Of course he had known. Damiano knew everything. It was his curse and his profession. He had told himself it wasn't his place. He had told himself Matteo would grow up, would come to his senses, would look at the woman across from him and finally see her. Matteo never saw anything he wasn't already looking at. The phone buzzed again. She's home, alone. Lights off. Damiano closed his eyes. He had spent 11 years being the shadow behind her, the man who dealt with the stranger at the gala. He'd broken 2 of that man's fingers in a service corridor, while Matteo was still fumbling his opening line. The kidnapping plot he'd unravelled and buried before it ever reached her ears. 3 men in a warehouse in Red Hook who would never trouble anyone again. The administrator asking about the Marchetti name. Damiano had made a single phone call, and the man had understood, in the way men in this city understood things, that his health depended on his forgetting. He had done all of it and asked for nothing. He had wanted nothing. He had needed only to know she was safe and sleeping and happy. Even if her happiness was built on a lie his brother told her every day. But now the lie had shattered on a bedroom floor, and Elena Marchetti was sitting alone in the dark, and for the first time in 11 years, Damiano did not know where he was supposed to stand. Behind her, always. That had been the rule. He picked up his phone and looked at it for a long time. He could go to her. He could ring the buzzer and stand in her doorway and finally say the thing he had swallowed for 11 years. And she would look at him and see her fiancé's brother, come to gloat or to pity or to manage the family embarrassment. She would never believe him. Why would she? He had spent 11 years making certain she never suspected. He put the phone down. He picked up the whiskey. This time he drank it. Outside, the rain fell on the city he owned and the one woman he did not, and Damiano Rossi returned to the only thing he knew how to be, the man in the dark coat, the shadow behind her, for now. Elena did not cry that night. She sat in the dark of her small apartment in Murray Hill, a 2-bedroom she'd chosen precisely because it was the kind of place a surgeon on a salary would live, nothing that whispered Marchetti. And she let the shock move through her in slow, cold waves. She still wore her coat. The rain had dried into her hair, leaving it stiff and salt-scented, and she sat on the edge of her bed and looked at nothing and thought about 4 years. 4 years of a man's easy laughter, 4 years of expensive dinners and weekend trips, and a bed that, she saw now, had always felt slightly performed, as though Matteo were playing the role of a devoted man rather than being one. She had mistaken his shallowness for lightness. She had told herself she was lucky to have found someone uncomplicated after a childhood so thick with agendas that she'd learned to read a business rival's intentions before she could read a picture book. She had wanted to be loved simply. Matteo had offered her the appearance of it, and she had been so hungry for the real thing that she'd swallowed the counterfeit whole. Around 3 in the morning, her phone lit up. Matteo. She let it ring out. It rang again and again. Then a text, then 5 texts, a cascade of them, and against her better judgment, she read the first. Elena, please. It didn't mean anything. Please, let me explain. It didn't mean anything. As if that were a comfort. As if the fact that he had thrown away 4 years of her devotion for something that meant nothing were not the cruelest part of all. She turned the phone face down. She thought she would feel destroyed. Instead, beneath the numbness, she found something she had not expected, a strange, cold clarity, like the moment in surgery when the noise falls away and there is only the wound and the work. She had been living inside a story someone else was writing, and the story had just ended. And now, for the first time in 4 years, She could see the room she was actually standing in. And in that room, at the edges, stood a figure she could not stop thinking about. Damiano. She had met him perhaps 20 times over the years. Sunday dinners, a birthday, once a hospital fundraiser he had attended for reasons she never questioned, standing against the wall in a black suit, watching the room with those still dark eyes that made everyone slightly nervous, and that she had, God help her, found herself glancing toward all night. He barely spoke to her. When he did, it was clipped, correct, almost cold. She had assumed he disapproved of her, that she was not, in the calculus of a Mafia family, a worthy alliance, being nobody, being a surgeon with no name. But now she turned the memories over, and each one showed her a different face. The way he had, at that fundraiser, materialized at her elbow when a drunk board member got too close, and steered the man away with a hand on his shoulder and 2 quiet words, and returned to his wall as if nothing had happened. The way he always knew where she was in a room. The way at one Sunday dinner Matteo had made a joke at her expense, something about her little hospital job, and the whole table had laughed, and Damiano had not laughed, and had said, in that flat, quiet voice, "She saves lives, Matteo. What do you do?" And the table had gone silent, and Matteo had flushed, and Elena had felt, absurdly, like weeping with gratitude, and had never understood why. She understood now. She got up. She crossed to the window of her apartment, which looked out over an unremarkable stretch of the city, and she pressed her palm flat against the cold glass, and she thought about the shadow that had stood behind her for 4 years, and she wondered, with a feeling that frightened her, because it was not grief, and grief was what she was supposed to be feeling. She wondered what his voice would sound like if he ever said more than a sentence to her. At dawn she showered and dressed and went to work, because a woman was scheduled for a valve replacement at 7, and that woman's life did not care about Elena's ruined engagement. She scrubbed in. She operated. Her hands did not shake. When it was done and the patient was stable, she stripped off her gloves in the scrub room and finally, for the first time, felt the sting behind her eyes. She did not let it fall. Not there. That afternoon, a courier delivered a package to the hospital front desk, addressed to her, no sender. Inside was a small black box, and inside that, her engagement ring, the platinum one she had dropped on Matteo's floor. She had left it there. She had walked out and never looked back, and assumed it was gone forever, absorbed into the wreckage of that apartment. Someone had retrieved it. Someone had found it on the floor of a room where her fiancé had betrayed her, and had it cleaned and returned it to her without a word or a name. Tucked beneath the ring was a single folded note, in handwriting she did not recognize, angular, controlled, the hand of a man who did nothing carelessly. This is yours. Whatever you choose to do with it, it should be your choice, not something left behind in his mess. If you ever need anything, call this number, any hour. You will never owe me an explanation. The phone number followed. Elena stood at the front desk of the hospital with the note in her hand and felt the cold clarity of the night before crack open, just slightly, and something warm and terrible seep through. You will never owe me an explanation. Not please forgive my brother. Not let me manage this for the family. Not pity. Just A door left open. No strings, no price. She folded the note and put it in the breast pocket of her white coat over her heart, and she did not call the number that day. But she did not throw it away either. She held out for 11 days. 11 days in which Matteo called and texted, and once showed up at the hospital with a bouquet the size of a shrub, and was politely turned away by security. She had asked to turn him away. 11 days in which her father's people, she still had them watching, a habit of self-preservation from her old life, reported that the Rossi family was closing ranks, that something was shifting in that world, though they could not say what. 11 days in which Elena went to work and came home and lay awake with a folded note over her heart. On the 12th day, a patient died. It was not her fault. It was no one's fault. An aneurysm no scan had shown. A woman of 40 who had come in for something small and bled out on the table before Elena could find the source. She had done everything right, and the woman had died anyway. And afterward, Elena walked out into the ambulance bay in the cold November dark and stood there, shaking, and she found that she did not want to call her friends, who would say the right things. And she did not want to call her father, who would say the wrong ones. And there was only one number in the world she wanted to dial. She told herself it was because he would not pity her. She dialed. He answered on the second ring. No greeting, just his voice, low and even. Elena? Not a question. He knew it was her. Of course he did. I'm sorry, she said, and her voice was steadier than she felt. I don't know why I'm calling. I lost a patient. She stopped. I didn't want to talk to anyone who would tell me it wasn't my fault. A pause, then, it wasn't your fault. A beat. But you already know that, and you're allowed to feel like hell about it anyway. Both things are true. Something in her chest unlocked. It was exactly the right thing, and it was exactly right because it did not try to fix her. Where are you? He asked. The hospital, the ambulance bay. It's cold. Go inside. There's a diner 2 blocks east, on the corner, all night. Good coffee, terrible everything else. A pause. I can meet you there. Or not. Your choice. I'm not far. She should have said no. He was her ex-fiancé's brother. He was, if the whispers she'd absorbed over the years were true, a dangerous man, the head of a family whose business was not the kind you spoke about at dinner. Every rule of sense told her to hang up and go home and grieve alone like a sane woman. The corner diner, she said. 20 minutes. He was already there when she arrived, in the back booth, in a dark coat, and the sight of him did something to her breath that she chose, in that moment, not to examine. He rose when she came in, an old-fashioned courtesy she hadn't expected, and waited until she sat before he did. Up close, without the distance of a dinner table, he was different than she remembered. The coldness she'd always read in him was still there, but she saw now that it was not emptiness. It was containment. A man holding something very heavy, very still, so that no one would see the strain. You look tired, she said, because she didn't know how to start. So do you. A ghost of something that wasn't quite a smile. You saved a boy's heart last week. 9 years old. 3 surgeons said it couldn't be done. She went still. How do you know that? He held her gaze. He did not look away, and he did not lie. And she would think later that this was the moment she began to trust him. That in a family built on secrets, he had chosen, with her, not to hide. "I know a great many things about you, Elena," he said quietly. "Some of them I have no right to know. If you want, I'll tell you all of it. But not tonight. Tonight you buried a patient you couldn't save, and you don't need my confession on top of your grief." The waitress came. He ordered coffee for them both, without asking, the way a man does when he already knows what you take, and Elena noticed he ordered hers exactly right. Black, no sugar. And she thought about how Matteo, after 4 years, had still sometimes put cream in her cup. They talked for 2 hours. Not about Matteo, not about the betrayal, not about the family, not about whatever was shifting in his dangerous world. They talked about the woman who died, and Elena told him things she had never told anyone. How she carried every one of them. How she had a list in a drawer, first names only, of everyone she'd lost on the table, and how she read it sometimes to remind herself that they had been real. She expected him to find it morbid. Instead, he was quiet for a long moment, and then said, "I have a list, too. Not of people I couldn't save." And he did not finish the sentence, and she understood. And the understanding did not frighten her the way it should have. When it was time to go, he walked her to a car, not a cab, a black car that appeared at the curb the moment they stepped outside, driven by a silent man who called Damiano boss. He opened the door for her. "Thank you," she said, "for not pitying me." "You don't need pity," he said. "You've never needed anything from anyone. That's the thing about you." He paused, and for just a second the containment slipped, and she saw something underneath it, something vast and old and aching. "It's the thing I've always—" He stopped himself. "Good night, Eleanor," he said, and closed the door. She rode home through the dark city, with her heart doing something complicated and unforgivable, and she thought, "It's the thing I've always what?" She did not sleep. But for the first time in 12 days, it was not grief that kept her awake. Matteo Rossi found his brother in the study of the family mansion in the Hamptons, where the winter sea threw itself against the dunes, and the house stood grey and enormous against a bruised sky. Damiano was at the desk, reviewing ledgers no one else was permitted to see, and he did not look up when Matteo came in. "You've been seeing her," Matteo said. Damiano turned a page. "Sit down." "I don't want to sit down. I want you to tell me you haven't been seeing Elena." "I've had coffee with her twice." Damiano finally looked up, and his eyes were flat and cold, and Matteo, who had spent his whole life in the shade of those eyes, felt the old familiar smallness creep into his chest. "She lost a patient. She needed someone who wouldn't lie to her. That ruled out you." The insult landed exactly where it was aimed. Matteo flushed. "That's not fair." "Isn't it?" Damiano closed the ledger. "You had the one thing in this world worth having, Matteo, and you rubbed it against every cheap thing you could find because you were bored. She walked in on you. She dropped the ring on the floor, and do you know what she did?" He rose from the desk, and though he did not raise his voice, he never raised his voice. The room seemed to grow colder. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She picked up whatever dignity you left her, and she walked out. That woman is worth 10 of you. She's worth 10 of me, and you threw her away like a receipt. So you're going to take her? Matteo's voice cracked. That's what this is. You've always wanted whatever I have. The laugh that came out of Damiano was quiet and terrible. Whatever you have? He crossed the room, and Matteo, despite himself, stepped back. I gave you everything you have, little brother. This family, your allowance, the car you drive, the apartment you defiled, the name that opens doors for you. I built the walls that keep you safe, so you could spend your life chasing skirts and calling it charm. I asked for one thing in return. His voice dropped, and for the first time in memory, Matteo heard it shake. One thing. I asked myself to stand back and let you be good to her. And you couldn't even do that. The silence stretched. Outside, the sea roared. You love her, Matteo said slowly, the realization dawning ugly and complete. How long? Damiano turned back to the window. He did not answer for a long time. Since before you knew she existed, he said finally. Since I was 17 years old. I watched her walk into a library and argue about Dante, and I have not had a single day of peace since. I stepped aside for you. I cleared every danger from her path and let you take the credit. I told myself her happiness was enough, even if it was yours to give and not mine. He turned, and his face was carved from stone. You made a liar of me, Matteo. You made me stand behind a woman I love and watch a man who doesn't deserve her make her small. So no, I'm not going to take her. She's not a thing to be taken. But I am done pretending I don't love her, and if she ever chooses to let me near her, I will not step aside again. Not for you, not for anyone. Matteo's hands were trembling. Father won't allow it. A surgeon, a nobody. The council wants you to marry into the Genovese family. You know they do. They've been saying, I know what they've been saying. You'd throw all of it away? For her? Damiano looked at his brother with something that was almost pity. You still don't understand. You think the empire is the thing worth protecting. It isn't. It never was. The empire is what I protect the things I love with. He picked up the ledger again. Go home, Matteo, and stop calling her. If I hear you frightened her, brother or not, we will have a very different conversation. Matteo left. He drove back to the city too fast, the wet road hissing under his tires, and somewhere on the Long Island Expressway, the fear curdled into something worse. Resentment. The low, mean resentment of a man who has always been given everything and has therefore never learnt to value anything. He had not wanted Eleanor. Not really. He'd wanted the ease of her, the way she made his life run smooth, the way her steadiness covered for his chaos. But now that his brother wanted her, she became, in Matteo's poisoned reckoning, a prize again, a thing to keep from Damiano out of spite. And Matteo Rossi, who lacked the strength to build anything, had always been very good at breaking things. He made a phone call. It was to a man he should not have known, a man on the outer edges of a rival family, the Genovese, the very people the council wanted Damiano to marry into. Matteo had met him at a club over cards and had filed him away the way weak men file away dangerous acquaintances, as insurance. He didn't fully understand what he was doing. He told himself he was only asking questions. He told himself he only wanted leverage, something to hold over his brother, some way to feel powerful for once in his life. He mentioned Elena's name. He mentioned, half drunk on his own bitterness, that his brother had gone soft over a surgeon, and that this surgeon was not, whatever she pretended, an ordinary woman at all. He did not know what her real name was, not then, but the man on the other end of the phone went very quiet, and then very interested, and asked Matteo to tell him more. And in the shadows of a world Matteo did not understand, a stone began to roll toward the woman his brother loved. Elena discovered the truth by accident, the way she discovered most important things, while looking for something else. It was a Saturday. Damiano had asked her to dinner, and she had said yes. And she had told herself it meant nothing, that two people could share a meal without it meaning anything, that she was allowed to have one person in the world who made her feel steady. He had sent a car. She had gone up to the family's city penthouse because he was finishing a call and had told her, in a text, to let herself in. The door's open. I'll only be a minute. And she had stepped into a home that was nothing like Matteo's showy apartment. This place was austere, beautiful, full of books and dark wood and a wall of glass that held the whole park. While she waited, she wandered, the way you do, and she came to a desk, and on the desk was a folder that had been left open. Not carelessly, she would realize later, but not carelessly on purpose either. He had simply forgotten it was her, forgotten to hide the parts of himself he hid from everyone. Her name was on it, Marchetti Elena. Her heart stopped. She should have closed it. It was a violation to look, but her hands were already turning the pages, and what she found there stole the breath from her body. It was not a file about a girlfriend's brother's fiancé. It was years of watchfulness rendered into paper, reports, photographs of her leaving the hospital, of her at the gala 4 years ago, of a man being intercepted by 2 others in a service corridor, while she, in the background, spoke obliviously to Matteo. Dates, a page about a break-in at her car, and beneath it a receipt for a security system installed under a false company name, paid in cash. A page about a hospital administrator named Voss, with a single line at the bottom in Damiano's angular hand. Handled. He will not ask about her again. A page about 3 men in Red Hook, which she read twice and then could not read a third time, because she understood what neutralized meant when a man like Damiano wrote it, and she understood that it had been done to keep her alive. 4 years. Longer. There were pages that predated Matteo entirely, a report from a college campus, a note about a professor who had made her uncomfortable and who had, she remembered now, abruptly stopped teaching her section. She had been 20. Damiano had been watching over her when she was 20 and had never met him. She was still standing there, the folder open in her hands, when she heard him come into the room. She turned. He stopped in the doorway. He saw the folder, and she watched something in his face. The great stillness he wore like armour, crack straight down the middle. "Eleanor," he said. "How long?" she said. Her voice did not sound like her own. "Damiano, how long have you been—" She gestured at the folder, at the years of it, at the impossible weight of it. "This is since before I knew you. This is since I was a child." He didn't move. He didn't lie. He had promised himself that first night in the diner that he would never lie to her. And he did not break the promise now, even though the truth might drive her from the room forever. "Since I was 17, he said. The words hung in the air. "You didn't know me," she whispered. "We spoke twice in high school. I borrowed a pen from you once. You—" "Blue," he said. "It was a blue pen. You were arguing with Mr. Halloran that Dante was too soft on the traitors. You said betrayal of trust deserved the 9th circle, deeper than violence, because violence is at least honest." He said it the way a man recites a prayer he has said 10,000 times. You were 17, and you understood something about the world that took me another decade and a great deal of blood to learn. I looked at you and I— His voice, that flat, controlled voice, finally failed him. "I have loved you for 11 years, Eleanor. I never meant for you to know. I never intended to touch it. I only wanted you to be safe and happy, and I told myself that if I couldn't be the one to give you those things, I could at least stand behind you and make sure the world never took them away." She should have been afraid. A rational woman standing in the home of a Mafia boss who had just confessed to more than a decade of surveillance should have been afraid. She was not afraid. She was undone, because every question she had never known to ask about her own life was answered in that folder. Every strange coincidence, every danger that had melted away before she could feel its heat. She had walked through the world for 11 years, believing she was ordinary and safe, and she had been neither. She had been a billionaire's hidden daughter, walking through a world full of wolves. And the only reason she was still alive to stand in this room was that a boy who loved her at 17 had grown into a man who never once let her out of his sight. "Matteo never protected me," she said slowly. "At the gala. It was already done before he ever spoke to me. It was you." "It was always me," Damiano said. "Every time. And I would do it all again. And I will never ask you for anything in return. And if you want to walk out that door right now and never speak to me again, I'll still be standing behind you for the rest of your life, whether you want me there or not. That's not a threat." His jaw tightened. "It's the only promise I've ever kept." Elena looked at the man across the room, cold, dangerous, obsessive, a killer, the head of a criminal empire, and she found, to her own astonishment and terror, that she did not want to walk out the door. She wanted to cross the room. She did not cross the room, not that night. She was not a woman who leapt. She had been raised in a world where every gesture had a price, and though she had fled that world, its lessons had made her careful. So she closed the folder, gently, and she set it on the desk. And she looked at Damiano Rossi across a space that felt both enormous and paper-thin, and she said, "I need to think." "I know," he said. "This is—" She searched for the word. "This is a great deal, Damiana. 11 days ago, I found out my fiancé had been cheating on me since before we were engaged. And now I find out his brother has been— that you've—" She pressed her fingers to her temple. "I don't even know what to call what you've been doing." "Loving you badly," he said, "from too far away." The plainness of it hit her like a blow. He did not dress it up. He did not perform contrition. He named the thing exactly, the way she named wounds in the OR, and she realized that this refusal to lie, to soften, to manage her, was the thing she had been starving for her entire life. Her whole existence had been managed. Her father managed her into marriages. Matteo managed her into believing his charm was love. And here was a man who could have manipulated her with terrifying skill, who ran an empire on the strategic management of human beings, and who chose, with her, only to tell the truth. "We should still have dinner," she said, surprising them both. "Not tonight, I can't tonight. But I don't want to run from you, Damiano. I've spent my whole life running from things. My name, my father, arranged marriages. I ran from all of it, and I ran straight into Matteo because he was easy, and easy felt like freedom." She looked at him. "You're not easy." "No," he agreed, "but I don't want to run from you." She picked up her coat. "Give me a week. Let me sit with all of this. And then take me to dinner and tell me the rest. All of it. The things you do. The things you are. I want to know what I'm—" She stopped, because she'd been about to say what I'm choosing, and it was too soon, far too soon, but the word had risen up in her anyway. "I want to know what you are," she finished, "before anything else happens, or doesn't happen." He nodded once. He did not push. He did not close the distance, though she could see in the coiled stillness of him how much it cost him not to. He walked her to the door, and at the threshold he paused, and for a moment they stood close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. And she looked up into his face and saw the 11 years there, the whole weight of them, and she almost. "Good night, Elena," he said, and stepped back and let her go. She spent the week in a kind of fever. She went to work, she operated. She was, her colleagues remarked, unusually sharp, almost luminous, and she did not tell them that she was falling, that she could feel herself falling, slow and terrifying, toward a man the whole world would tell her to run from. She thought about the folder. She thought about the 3 men in Red Hook, and she waited to feel horror. And the horror did not come, and its absence was its own kind of horror. What did it mean about her that she could read neutralized and feel not fear, but the shameful warmth of being chosen, of mattering that much to someone that they would spill blood to keep her breathing? She was a surgeon. She had taken an oath. And she was falling in love with a man who had, in all likelihood, killed people. She turned it over and over, and she could not make it into something simple. And she stopped trying, because she was learning that Damiano's great gift was that he did not offer her simplicity. He offered her truth, and truth was rarely clean. Meanwhile, Matteo would not stay away. He called, he wrote, he sent once a long email in which he blamed his father, his upbringing, the pressure of the family, everything except himself. And Eleanor read it and felt nothing at all, which was how she knew she was truly finished with him. But then, 3 days into her week of thinking, the messages changed. They grew colder, stranger. "You don't know what he is," one said. "You think he's protecting you. Ask him what he's protecting you from. Ask him why they've suddenly started asking about you again. Ask your new boyfriend why the Genovese know your name." Elena stared at the message. Why the Genovese know your name? She did not know the name Genovese, but the phrasing, Know your name, snagged in her chest like a hook. Her name. Her real name. The one thing she had spent a decade hiding. The one truth that could unravel her whole, careful, ordinary life. Marchetti. Only her father's people and a handful of trusted others had ever known that Dr. Elena Marchetti, the surgeon, was the same Elena Marchetti whose father's face appeared on the covers of business magazines. How would Matteo know to write that? How would he know there was a name to know? She called Damiano. He answered on the first ring. "Something's wrong," she said. "Matteo just sent me a message. He mentioned people called the Genovese. He said they know my name, my real name, Damiano. How would he know I have a real name to know?" There was a silence on the line, so complete and so cold that she could feel his mind moving through it, fast and lethal, arriving somewhere terrible. "Where are you right now?" Damiano said, and his voice had changed entirely. No longer the quiet of containment, but the quiet of a drawn blade. "Exactly. Don't move. Tell me where you are." "I'm at the hospital, in my office. Damiano, you're frightening me." "Good," he said. "Be frightened. It'll keep you sharp. I'm sending Enzo now. He'll be there in 12 minutes. He'll show you a photograph of me on his phone, so you know he's mine. Don't leave with anyone else. Don't leave at all until he's standing in front of you." A pause, and then, lower, the fear underneath the command. "Eleanor, I need you to trust me for the next hour, more than you've ever trusted anyone. Can you do that?" She looked at the door of her office, the ordinary door of her ordinary life. "Yes," she said. "Good girl," he said, and the line went dead, and Eleanor sat very still in a room that no longer felt safe, and understood that the shadows behind her had just moved. Enzo Carboni arrived in 10 minutes, not 12, and he showed her the photograph on his phone before she could ask. Damiano, unsmiling, standing beside a younger version of the man now in her doorway. Both of them at some formal event years ago. Enzo was perhaps 50, broad through the shoulders, with grey at his temples, and the gentle, patient manner of a man who had seen enough violence that he no longer needed to advertise his capacity for it. "Dr. Marchetti," he said, and inclined his head, and she noticed he used her real name easily, which meant Damiano's people all knew it, which meant her secret had never been secret from the one family that mattered. "The boss asked me to bring you somewhere safe. You can trust me. I've been with him 20 years. Before that, his father." A pause. "I'd take a bullet for you, and not because he told me to. He doesn't have to tell me things like that." She gathered her coat. "What's happening, Enzo?" He was quiet as they walked to the elevator. 2 other men falling into step behind them, men she hadn't noticed in the hallway and who had apparently been there for some time. "That's the boss's to tell," he said finally, "but I'll say this. In 20 years I've seen Damiano Rossi angry maybe 3 times. Really angry, the kind that ends with someone in the ground. And I've never once seen him afraid." The elevator descended. Tonight, on the phone, he was afraid. So whatever this is, it's the realest thing I've ever seen him care about. He glanced at her, not unkindly. "That's you, Doctor, in case you were wondering where you stood." They put her in an armoured car. She could tell it was armoured by the weight of the doors, a detail her old life had taught her, and drove her not to the penthouse, but somewhere else. A building in Tribeca she'd never seen, a safe house done up like a luxury apartment, warm and anonymous. Damiano was waiting. The moment she came through the door, he crossed to her, and for a second she thought he would take her in his arms, and she saw him stop himself, saw the effort of it, and instead he simply stood in front of her and searched her face as though counting her, making sure she was whole. "You're all right," he said. Not a question, a confirmation he needed to say aloud. "I'm all right. Damiano, tell me what's happening. All of it. You promised you'd never lie to me. Don't start by hiding things to protect me. I've had a lifetime of men hiding things to protect me. It never protects me. It just leaves me blind." Something moved in his face, respect and grief and love, all tangled. He gestured to a sofa. He poured 2 glasses of wine and handed her one and sat across from her, close but not too close, and he told her, "There's a power struggle in my family," he said. "There has been for a year. My father is old. The council, the men who really run things beneath the family name, they want a succession that strengthens the Rossi position. There's a rival family, the Genovese, powerful, ambitious. The council's plan was an alliance, a marriage. Me to a Genovese daughter." He turned the wineglass in his fingers. "I've been refusing, quietly, for a year, because I couldn't stomach it, and because I've never wanted anything the council could offer me. This made me inconvenient. Some of them would prefer Matteo as heir. He's malleable. He'd do as he's told." "Matteo could never run a family," Elena said. "No, but he could be made to look like he could if he had the right alliances, the right marriage." Damiano's eyes came up to hers, and something in them was very careful. "And here is the thing, Elena, the thing that is going to be hard to hear. You are the most valuable alliance in this entire city, and neither Matteo nor the council ever knew it. Until now." She went cold. "Because of my father." "Because of your father." He set down his wine. "Vincenzo Marchetti is one of the richest men in America. His company touches everything. Hospitals, research, government contracts, supply chains a family like mine can only dream of controlling. A marriage into the Marchetti fortune wouldn't just strengthen a Mafia family, it would transform one. It would make whoever held it untouchable." He let that settle. Matteo had that. For 4 years, Matteo Rossi was engaged to the heir to the Marchetti fortune, and he never knew, because you hid it so well, and because he never once cared enough to look. He had the greatest alliance in the underworld sitting across from him at breakfast, and he was too busy chasing waitresses to notice. Helena laughed, a short, disbelieving, bitter sound. "So if he'd loved me, if he'd valued me, he could have made himself heir, surpassed me, owned this whole city." Damiano's mouth twisted. "The council would have crowned him. All he had to do was cherish you, and he couldn't even do that." He leaned forward. "But somehow, now, the truth is out. Someone has connected Dr. Elena Marchetti to Vincenzo Marchetti. And once the Genovese know that, you stop being a woman and start being a prize, an asset to be seized. Leverage against me, against my family, against your father. Elena." And here his voice dropped, and the fear Enzo had described bled through. "The moment your identity is known, every dangerous man in this city has a reason to take you. Not to hurt you, to use you. And that's worse in some ways, because they'll keep you alive, and they'll keep you as a bargaining chip. And I will burn this entire city to the ground before I let that happen. The room was very quiet. Matteo, Elena said slowly, the message. He knew about the Genovese. He knew about my name. She looked up. Damiano. Did your brother do this? Did he tell them? And she watched the truth arrive in Damiano's face and watched him, for the first time, try to hide something from her, out of loyalty to blood, and then watched him fail, because he had promised, and Damiano Rossi kept his promises. I don't know yet, he said, but I'm going to find out. And if he did, he didn't finish. He didn't have to. Damiano found out within the hour. He had Matteo brought to the safe house, not dragged, not harmed, but brought, in the way that men in Damiano's world were brought places when the boss wanted them, with two of Enzo's people flanking him and no illusions on anyone's part about whether he had a choice. Eleanor was moved to a bedroom down the hall, but the door was old and the walls were thin, and she heard most of it, and she would wish, later, that she had heard none. Sit down, Damiano said. Dammy, whatever they told you, sit down. The scrape of a chair. Helena, in the dark bedroom, pressed her back to the wall and listened to two brothers she had loved in two entirely different ways. There's a man named Salvatore Genovese, Damiano said, and his voice was the flat quiet Enzo had called the kind that ends with someone in the ground. You met him at the Carbon Club. Cards. You've been in his debt for 8 months. $40,000, which you never told me, which you hid, because you knew what I'd say. A pause. 3 weeks ago you called him. My people have the record. You told him your brother had gone soft over a surgeon. And then, Matteo, and I need you to say this part yourself, because I want to hear you say it. You told him the surgeon wasn't what she seemed. Didn't you? Silence. Didn't you? I didn't know, Matteo said, and his voice was already cold and hide anymore, cracking down the middle. I mean, I didn't know what she was, not exactly. I only said she wasn't ordinary, that there was money behind her, family money. I heard you talking to Enzo once. You heard me protecting her, Damiano said, and you sold it for a card debt. I wanted leverage. Matteo's voice rose, desperate now. You were going to take her from me. You said you would. You stood in that study and told me you'd never step aside again. What was I supposed to do? Just let you have her, like you have everything else? The sound that followed was not a shout. Elena had braced for a shout. Instead, there was a long, terrible silence. And when Damiano finally spoke, his voice was quieter than she had ever heard it, and it was worse than any shout could have been. You didn't sell her to hurt me, he said. You sold her because you couldn't stand that I might have something I actually loved. You've never wanted anything in your life, Matteo, not really. You've only ever wanted to keep other people from having things. And this time, it wasn't a car or a girl at a club. This time, it was her life. Do you understand that? Salvatore Genovese doesn't want to embarrass me. He wants to take her. Snatch her off a street and hold her in a room somewhere and use her to bleed the Marchetti fortune and the Rossi name dry. And when he's done, if she's lucky, he lets her go. And if she's not, He stopped. You put her in that room, Matteo. You, not me, you. Dammi, get out. Where am I supposed to? I don't care. And now, finally, the cold broke, just once, just for a sentence. You are my brother, and I have protected you every day of your life. And right now, I cannot look at you, because if I keep looking at you, I am going to do something to you that I will regret at my father's funeral. So get out of this house before I stop being able to remember that we share a mother. A chair scraped, footsteps, the door, and then nothing. Elena stood in the dark bedroom with her hand pressed to her mouth, and she understood that the two brothers she had known were both, in this moment, gone. Matteo into whatever exile his own weakness had earned him, and Damiano into whatever he was about to become, to keep her alive. The bedroom door opened. Damiano stood in it, and the fury had already been folded away, packed back down beneath the containment, and only the exhaustion showed, and beneath the exhaustion, the fear, which never fully left him now. "You heard," he said. "I heard." He came into the room. He sat on the edge of the bed, and he put his head in his hands, this cold and dangerous man, this head of a family, and for a moment he was simply a man who had just lost his brother to save the woman he loved. And Elena did the thing she had not been able to do in his study a week before. She crossed the room. She sat beside him. She put her hand on his back, between his shoulder blades, over the place where all that weight was carried, and she felt him go still under her touch, utterly still, the way a wild thing goes still when something it has longed for finally comes close. "I'm sorry," she said, "about Matteo, about all of it." "Don't be sorry for me." His voice was muffled. "I've had 11 years to make my peace with what I am. I only ever wanted you to be safe from it. And instead I'm sitting in a safe house because your world came for me anyway." He lifted his head and looked at her, and there was something in his eyes she'd never seen. Not the fear, not the fury, but a kind of terrible tenderness. The look of a man who has been thirsty for a decade and cannot quite believe there is water. "I'm going to fix this," he said. "I need you to understand what that means. It means I'm going to do things in the next few days that you may not want to know about. Things that are the reason I never let myself near you. When it's done, the Genovese will not touch you, and your father's name will not be a weapon anyone can use against you, and you'll be free again. And if, after you see what I'm capable of, you want to walk away, I'll let you. I'll go back to being the shadow. I'll protect you from a distance for the rest of my life, and you'll never have to see me again." Elena looked at him. She thought about her whole life, the arranged marriages, the gilded cage, the shallow ease of Matteo, the endless management of her by men who called it love. And she thought about this man, who had loved her for 11 years without asking for a single thing, who told her the truth even when the truth cost him everything, who was offering her, right now, even his own absence, if that was what she wanted. "Stop offering to disappear," she said. "It's the one thing you keep getting wrong." He went very still again. "I don't want the shadow, Damiano." Her voice shook, but she did not look away. "I've had enough of shadows. I've had enough of men standing behind me. I want to see your face. I want you where I can look at you. Fix this. Do what you have to do, and then don't you dare offer to disappear again. Do you understand me?" For a long moment he didn't move, and then he reached up slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, and cupped the side of her face in a hand that had done terrible things and was, against her cheek, unbearably gentle. "Yes," he said, "I understand you." He did not kiss her, not then. There was too much still hanging over them, too much blood not yet spilled or spared. But he pressed his forehead to hers, and they breathed the same air in the dark, and it was, for both of them, more than any kiss they had ever known. The Rossi family council met in a room without windows, beneath a restaurant in Little Italy that had been in the family for 60 years, and Damiano walked into it the next morning, knowing that he might not walk out of it as the heir. There were 7 of them, old men mostly, men who had known his father when his father was young and dangerous, men who had blood on their hands going back to a different century. They sat around a long table, and at its head sat his father, Don Cesare Rossi, gaunt now, his hands trembling with the illness he refused to name, but his eyes still sharp, still terrible, still the eyes of a man who had ordered more deaths than he could count. "Sit, Damiano," his father said. He sat. "There's talk," said Tommaso Ricci, the oldest of the council, a man with a voice like gravel in a bucket. "Talk that the heir has gone soft over a woman, a surgeon, and now talk that this same surgeon is not a surgeon at all, but the daughter of Vincenzo Marchetti." He folded his spotted hands. "You'll understand our interest, Damiano. This changes things considerably." "It changes nothing," Damiano said. "It changes everything." Ricci leaned forward. "For a year you've refused the Genovese marriage. For a year you've made yourself difficult, told us you'd take no alliance, that the family was strong enough on its own. And all the while you were sitting on the greatest alliance any of us has ever seen, and saying nothing. Explain that to me. Explain to this table why the heir concealed the Marchetti fortune from his own council." And here it was. The moment Damiano had known was coming since the safe house, the moment his whole future turned on. He could lie. He could tell them he'd been playing a long game, that he'd hidden Elena's identity as a strategic reserve, that he'd meant all along to leverage it. They would respect that. It was the kind of thing they understood. It would secure his position, satisfy the council, make him untouchable. It would also make Elena into exactly the thing he had spent 11 years keeping her from being: an asset, a piece on a board. He looked at his dying father, and he made his choice. "I concealed it," Damiano said, "because I love her, and because the moment any of you knew who she was, she stopped being a person and became a prize. I've spent 11 years making sure that never happened. I hid her from you, the same way I've hidden her from every wolf in this city, not as strategy, as protection." He let his gaze move around the table, unflinching, meeting each old killer's eyes in turn. "I know what you want. You want me to marry the fortune, to seize her, formalize it, make the Rossi family untouchable on the back of the Marchetti name. And I'm telling you now, so there's no confusion later. I will not do it. I will not touch her father's money. I will not use her as an alliance. If she chooses me, if it's her choice and hers alone, it will be as a man, not as a family, and this council will get nothing from it but my continued loyalty. The silence was absolute. "You'd refuse the greatest alliance in the history of this family," Ritchie said slowly, "for sentiment." "I'd refuse it because she's a person and not a purchase." Damiano's voice never rose. "And because a family that would seize a woman off the street to bleed her father dry is not a family. It's a pack of dogs. My grandfather built something. My father built something. I've spent my whole life protecting it. But if protecting it means becoming Salvatore Genovese, then I don't want it, and you can give it to whoever you like." "To Matteo, perhaps?" said a thin man near the end of the table, one of the ones who'd always favoured the younger brother. "Matteo," Damiano said, "sold this woman's identity to the Genovese 3 weeks ago to settle a card debt. Matteo is the reason we're having this conversation. Matteo is the leak." He watched that land, watched the thin man's face fall, watched the council recalculate in real time. "So no, not Matteo. If you want to strip me of the succession, do it. But understand that the Genovese are already moving. They know who she is. They're going to try to take her. And when they do, it will be an act of war against both the Rossi and the Marchetti names. And if this council does nothing, if you sit here and haggle over her like a shipment, then you deserve to lose everything my family ever built." For a long moment, no one spoke. And then Don Cesare Rossi, who had said nothing this entire time, who everyone in the room had half forgotten was dying, began, slowly, to laugh. It was a dry, rattling, awful sound, and it went on longer than was comfortable. And when it stopped, the old man wiped his eyes and looked at his son with an expression Damiano had not seen on his father's face in 30 years. "You know," Cesare said, "your grandfather refused an alliance once, a good one, powerful. He refused it because he'd fallen in love with a baker's daughter, your grandmother. The council of his day thought he was a fool. He smiled, and it was terrible and fond. He buried every one of them, died in his bed at 91 with her hand in his." He turned to the table. "My son has just told you the truth when a lie would have served him better. He has refused power for principle. Do you understand what that means? It means he cannot be bought. It means he cannot be turned. It means he is the only one of us who is not for sale." The old man's voice hardened into the thing that had made him a legend. "He is my heir. This is not a discussion. And the Genovese who dares to touch the woman he loves will discover what the Rossi family does to men who reach for our throats. That is the alliance we make today, not a marriage, a war. Are we understood?" Around the table, one by one, the old men bowed their heads. Damiano let out a breath he felt he had been holding for 11 years. Elena had not spoken to her father in 3 years. The last conversation had ended with a slammed door and a decade of resentment spilling out of her. Every arranged suitor, every business dinner she'd been paraded through as a merger asset, every time Vincenzo Marchetti had looked at his only child and seen not a daughter, but the continuation of an empire. She had walked out of his world and remade herself with her own hands, and she had told herself she needed nothing from him ever again. Now she sat in the safe house and dialed his private number, the one that hadn't changed, and when he answered, "Marchetti," in that voice like a vault door, She found her own voice caught in her throat. "Papa," she said, "it's me." The silence on the line was long enough that she wondered if he'd hung up. Then, quietly, in a tone she had never heard from him, "Elena, my God, are you all right? Are you hurt?" "I'm safe. For now." She closed her eyes. "But there's a situation. I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen and not manage me. Can you do that? Just this once?" "Tell me." So she told him. Not everything. Not the 11 years, not the folder, not the way her heart had reorganized itself around a Mafia boss, but the danger. The Genovese. The threat to her, and by extension to him, to the company, to everything he'd built. She braced for him to take over, to summon his security, to fold her back into the gilded cage in the name of protecting her. Instead, when she finished, her father was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "The man protecting you. Rossi. The older brother, not the fool you were engaged to." A statement, not a question. Damiano. Elena's breath caught. "How do you—" "Elena." A dry, sad laugh, so like the one his own generation of dangerous men all seemed to carry. "Did you truly believe I let my only child vanish into the city and live as a common surgeon without knowing where you were every single day? I've had people watching you for years. To keep you safe. It's the one thing your grandfather taught me. You protect your blood, whatever the cost, whether they thank you for it or not." Elena sat very still, and something turned over in her chest, because she had heard those words before. Whether they want you there or not. It was almost exactly what Damiano had said. "You knew," she whispered. "You knew someone was protecting me. The car alarm, the man at the gala, all of it." "My people reported it, yes, every time. A shadow, clearing the road in front of you." Her father paused. "At first I thought it was a threat. I nearly moved against it. And then I watched, and I understood that whoever it was, they weren't hunting you. They were guarding you. Better than my own people, if I'm honest. For 4 years I let it continue, because you were safer with that shadow than without it." A long breath. "I didn't know his name until recently. When I learned it was the Rossi heir, a man who could have used you 100 ways and never once did. I confess, Eleanor, I didn't know what to make of him." "Neither do I," Eleanor admitted. "Papa, you know what that family is, what he is." "I know exactly what he is." Her father's voice was even. "I've done business in this city for 40 years. You don't build what I've built without knowing which shadows are which. The Rossi family are killers, Eleanor. Let's not pretend otherwise. But I've dealt with a great many powerful men in my life, and I've learned to tell the difference between a man who wants something from you and a man who wants something for you. Your fiancé, the one who cheated, the one who sold your name, he wanted things from you and never even knew how much you were worth. This other one, this Damiano, he's had the most valuable secret in the city sitting in the palm of his hand for years, and he's spent it all on nothing but keeping you alive." A pause. "In my experience, my daughter, that second kind of man is rarer than diamonds, and a good deal more dangerous to lose." Elena felt tears sting her eyes. the first she'd allowed herself since the whole nightmare began. "You're not going to tell me to run," she said, "to come home, to let you handle it." "Would you listen if I did?" "No." "Then I won't waste the breath." Her father's voice warmed, just slightly, and for the first time in her adult life she heard something in it that sounded like respect for the woman she'd made herself into, rather than mourning for the asset she'd refused to be. "But I'll tell you this, the Marchetti name is not nothing. If the Rossi family stands with you against these Genovese, then they stand with me also, and I am not a man without teeth. Tell your Damiano that Vincenzo Marchetti is aware of the situation, and that anyone who moves against my daughter moves against everything I own. That's not an alliance of marriage. It's an alliance of fathers protecting their own." A dry pause. "He'll understand. His kind always does." "Papa," her voice broke. "I'm sorry. For the 3 years. For the door." "I know," he said gently. "So am I. We'll speak of it when you're safe, and not before. Because right now I need you frightened and careful, not weeping over an old man's mistakes." But the tenderness stayed in his voice. "Stay alive, Eleanor. Come home when this is over. Not to stay, I've learned that lesson. Just to let me look at you. It's been 3 years. I'd like to see your face." "I will," she said. "I promise." When she hung up, she sat in the quiet of the safe house and understood with a strange dawning clarity that the two most dangerous men in her life, her father and Damiano, had spent years standing behind her in exactly the same way, and that she had spent that whole time believing herself alone. She had been so busy running from being protected that she'd never noticed how completely she was loved. She wiped her eyes. When Damiano came through the door an hour later, back from the council, with the exhaustion of the fight still on him, and news that his father had named him heir, she rose and crossed the room to him without hesitation this time. And this time she was the one who reached up and touched his face. They did not mean for it to happen that night. There was too much still in motion, the Genovese circling, the war Don Cesare had declared not yet joined, Matteo somewhere in the city nursing his ruin. A wise couple would have waited. Neither of them had ever been especially wise about the other. It began with her hand on his face in the doorway of the safe house, and the way he closed his eyes at her touch, as if it were the only mercy he'd been shown in years. It began with the exhaustion in him, the way the containment had worn thin after the council, the way, for once, he did not have the strength to hide how much he wanted her. "You won the council," she said softly. "You're the heir." "I told them the truth," he said. "I told them I wouldn't use you. I told 7 of the most dangerous men in this city that I'd throw away the whole empire before I'd turn you into an asset." His eyes opened, and they were raw. "My father laughed, and then he named me heir. I still don't entirely understand it." "I understand it." Her thumb traced the sharp line of his cheekbone. "You were the only one who couldn't be bought. Even his old killers can see that's worth more than money." She searched his face. "You'd really have thrown it away? All of it?" "For me." "Elena." He said her name like it was the only word he knew. "I've spent 11 years measuring everything in the world against you, and nothing has ever come close. Not the family, not the empire, not my own life. There's you, And then there's everything else, and the everything else has never once mattered. His hand came up and covered hers where it rested against his face. I would burn it all. I would burn it all and stand in the ashes and count myself the luckiest man alive if you were standing next to me. The whole world narrowed to the space between them. You never once tried to take me, she said. In 11 years, you could have. Men like you take what they want. You told me that yourself. Why didn't you? Because you're not a thing to take. His voice dropped almost to nothing. Because the only version of having you that I ever wanted was the version where you chose it. Where you looked at all of me. The blood, the shadows, the terrible things I've done and will do again to keep you safe. And you chose it anyway. Anything less than that isn't love. It's just possession. And I've possessed a great many things in my life, Eleanor. None of them ever kept me warm. She kissed him. She rose up on her toes and closed the last inch of the 11 years between them and pressed her mouth to his. And for a heartbeat, he went utterly still. The stillness of a man who cannot believe the thing he has wanted for a decade is finally, actually happening. And then something in him broke open, and his arms came around her, and he kissed her back like a man coming up out of deep water, like a man who had been holding his breath since he was 17 years old and had only now, finally, been allowed to breathe. He was gentle at first, careful, as though she might change her mind, as though he were still, even now, giving her every chance to step back. And then she fisted her hand in his shirt and pulled him closer, and the carefulness burned away, and 11 years of longing poured into it, his hand cradling the back of her head, her name breathed against her lips like a prayer between kisses, the low sound in his chest when she pressed herself against him. When they finally broke apart, both of them unsteady, he rested his forehead against hers, exactly as he had in the dark bedroom, and this time there was no grief in it, only wonder. "I've imagined that," he confessed, barely audible, "more times than I'll ever admit to you." "Was it?" She was breathless, half laughing. "Was it what you imagined?" "No." He pulled back just enough to look at her, and his eyes, for the first time since she'd known him, were unguarded. The whole man laid bare, the cold stripped away, only the love beneath it, vast and terrifying and true. "It was better. It's always better. You've never once been what I imagined. You've always been more." She kissed him again, slower this time, and he gathered her against him like something precious. And for a little while, the war outside the walls ceased to exist. There was only a man who had loved a woman for 11 years, and the woman who had finally turned around to face the shadow behind her and found, instead of something to fear, the truest thing she had ever known. Later, much later, they lay tangled together in the dark, her head on his chest, his hand moving slowly through her hair, and she listened to his heart, this cold, dangerous, obsessive man's ordinary human heart, beating steady and sure beneath her cheek. "When this is over," she said into the quiet, "I want you to do something for me. Anything. Stop standing behind me." She lifted her head to look at him. "Stand next to me, wherever we go. I don't want to be protected from a distance anymore. If your world is dangerous, then let me see it. Let me stand in it with you, eyes open. I'd rather be beside you in the danger than safe and alone in the dark, wondering who's watching me." His hand went still in her hair. "You don't know what you're asking," he said quietly. "I do. I've spent my whole life around dangerous men. My father, you. I know exactly what I'm asking." She laid her palm flat over his heart. "I'm asking you to trust me with the truth of you. All of it. That's the only thing I've ever wanted from anyone. To be shown the truth and loved anyway, and to give the same back." He looked at her for a long time in the dark. "Beside me," he said at last, like a vow. "Not behind. I swear it." Outside the city glittered, dangerous and beautiful, and somewhere in it the Genovese were sharpening their knives. But in that room, for one night, two people who had each spent their lives alone, finally, simply, were not. Salvatore Genovese was not a patient man, and impatience in his world was a kind of disease. He was younger than the Rossi Don, harder, hungrier, a man who had clawed his way up through the ranks by being willing to do the things others hesitated over, and who now stood at the head of a family that had been waiting a generation for the Rossi throne to weaken. Cesare Rossi was dying, everyone knew it, and into that opening had walked the most extraordinary piece of luck Salvatore had ever been handed. A drunk, resentful younger Rossi brother, spilling a secret worth an empire across a card table. The Marchetti girl. Salvatore had verified it 3 times before he let himself believe it. Dr. Elena Marchetti, ordinary surgeon, was Elena Marchetti, sole heir to a fortune that made even the great families look like street vendors. And she was, until very recently, unprotected. Or so he'd thought, until his people started looking closer and found the shadow that had been guarding her for years. Damiano Rossi, in love, compromised, weak. "A man in love is a man with a wound," Salvatore told his lieutenant in the back of the club he ran in Brooklyn. "You don't fight a man like Damiano Rossi head-on. He's too careful, too cold. But show me the thing he loves, and I'll show you the exact spot to put the knife." He smiled. "We take the girl, quietly. We don't hurt her. A hair on her head is worth more than this whole building. We hold her, and we let it be known, and we watch the great Damiano Rossi tear his own empire apart, trying to get her back. And when he's weak enough, we take everything. The Rossi territory, the Marchetti fortune, all of it. One girl, one knife, one empire." It was a good plan. It had only one flaw, which was that Salvatore Genovese did not understand what he was dealing with, because he had made the oldest mistake in his world, the mistake of believing that a man in love was a man made weaker. He had never loved anything enough to know the truth. Damiano Rossi in love was not a man with a wound. He was a man with a reason. And a man like Damiano with a reason was the single most dangerous thing the city had ever produced. They made their move on a Thursday. Elena had insisted, over Damiano's objections, over Enzo's, over everyone's, on going back to the hospital. "I have patients," she'd said, "people who will die if I don't operate. I won't let your war cost innocent lives. I'll take your men. I'll follow every rule, but I'm going to work." And Damiano, who had sworn to stand beside her and not to cage her, had looked at her for a long moment, and then, against every instinct screaming in his blood, had agreed, and had quietly tripled her security, and had sat in a car outside the hospital for 11 hours, like the shadow he'd sworn to stop being, because some habits are older than promises. It was that decision that saved her. The Genovese team hit the parking structure at shift change when they expected her to be walking to her car. 4 men, a van, a plan that had worked a dozen times before. What they did not expect was that the 2 orderlies near the elevator were Enzo's men, or that the man in the parked sedan was Damiano himself, or that the moment the first Genovese soldier reached for Elena's arm, the entire quiet structure would erupt into the kind of violence that Salvatore had been so sure Damiano was too compromised to bring. Elena saw it happen. She would never forget it. She saw a hand close on her wrist, and then she saw Damiano. He came out of the sedan like something uncoiling, and there was nothing cold in him now, nothing contained. There was only a man whose entire reason for living had just been touched by someone who meant her harm. She had known, abstractly, what he was. She had read the word neutralized in a folder. But she had never seen it, and seeing it was different, and she would spend the rest of her life reconciling the 2 Damianos, the one who moved through her hair in the dark, and the one who crossed a parking structure in 4 seconds and put himself between her and 4 armed men without a flicker of fear. It was over quickly. It was not gentle. 2 of the Genovese men would not be getting up. The other 2 ran. Enzo's people swept her into the armoured car before the echoes had even faded, and through the window she saw Damiano standing in the aftermath, chest heaving, blood on his knuckles, his eyes finding hers through the glass, and in that look was the whole of him. "You're safe. I've got you. I will always, always have you." She should have been horrified. Instead, when he climbed into the car beside her a moment later, still breathing hard, still carrying the violence on him like heat off a fire, she took his bloodied hand in both of hers and held it against her chest, over her racing heart, and she said the only thing that mattered. "You came out of the shadow," she said. "You didn't watch from the car. You came out where I could see you. I told you I would." His voice was rough. "Beside you, not behind. Even when behind is safer. Even when—" He broke off, and she saw his hands were shaking now, the adrenaline crashing, the fear he never showed finally surfacing. "I almost didn't reach you in time. Another second." "But you did." She pressed his hand harder against her heart. "You did. Feel that? I'm alive. I'm right here." She lifted his knuckles to her lips and kissed them, blood and all, and he made a sound she'd never heard from him, something breaking open. "Now take me home. And then, Damiano, then you're going to end this, because I won't spend my life in safe houses. I want a life with you, in the open. And that means Salvatore Genovese cannot exist in the same city as us. Do you understand what I'm telling you?" He looked at her, this surgeon, this healer, this woman who saved lives with her hands, telling him, with perfect clarity, to end a man's threat forever. "You're certain," he said quietly. "Once I do this, you can't unknow what I am." "I already know what you are," she said. "I've always known. I just spent 4 years looking at the wrong brother. She held his gaze. End it. The Rossi family went to war the way old money spends, quietly, precisely, and without ever seeming to move at all. Damiano did not do anything dramatic. There were no burning warehouses, no bodies in the street, none of the theatre that lesser men mistook for power. Instead, over the course of 9 days, the empire of Salvatore Genovese began, methodically, to come apart at every seam. Damiano had spent years quietly mapping. Elena watched it happen from the inside, because she had insisted, because he had promised, beside me, not behind, and because Damiano had discovered that keeping his word to her meant letting her see the machinery of what he was. She sat in the war room beneath the Little Italy restaurant and listened to men decide the fate of an empire. "His money moves through 3 banks," Enzo said, laying photographs on the table. "2 of them we have people inside. The third, Don Marchetti's company, happens to be the largest depositor, and a word from him has already frozen certain accounts pending a compliance review that will take, as long as we need it to take." Elena blinked. Her father. Her father was in this, quietly. A phone call and a frozen account, a billionaire's teeth bared on her behalf, without a single shot fired. "His shipping lanes," another man continued. "The Ricci family owed us a favour. They've stopped moving Genovese product through the port. Costs Salvatore 200,000 a week, and he can't say a word about it, because the moment he complains, he admits the Rossi have him by the throat. His men," Enzo said, "are noticing that their boss picked a fight he can't win, and men in our world are only loyal until loyalty stops paying. 3 of his lieutenants have already reached out, quietly, asking what terms we'd offer if certain problems were to resolve themselves." Damiano sat at the head of the table, still as ever, and orchestrated the dismantling of a man with the patience of a surgeon, and Elena, watching, understood at last why they called him cold. It was not that he felt nothing, it was that he felt everything so intensely that he had learned to move all of it underground, to run it silent and deep, so that on the surface there was only this terrible calm, this glacial certainty, this sense that he had already seen how everything ended and was simply waiting for the world to catch up. "You could kill him," Elena said quietly, when the others had gone and it was only the 2 of them. "You could just end it, the way you ended those men in the parking structure. Why all this? The banks, the shipping, the lieutenants. Why so slow?" Damiano turned to her. "Because killing Salvatore Genovese solves nothing. His family would elevate someone new, someone angry, someone with a blood debt against us, and it would start again, and it would never end, and you would never be safe." He shook his head. "You don't win in my world by killing your enemy. Any fool can kill. You win by making it so that killing you costs your enemy more than leaving you alone. You win by taking away everything a man has until he understands, all the way down to his bones, that touching you again would be the end of him. Then you let him live." A cold smile. A dead enemy is a martyr. A living, ruined, terrified enemy is a lesson every other wolf in the city learns for free. Elena studied him. "You've thought about this a great deal." "I've thought about nothing else for 11 years, he said, "except how to keep you safe without you ever having to know it was happening. This is just the first time I've had to do it where you could watch." He looked at her, and something vulnerable moved behind the calm. Does it frighten you, seeing this? I'd understand if it did. I'd understand if you looked at all of this and wanted no part of it. She was quiet for a moment. It should frighten me, she admitted. A sane woman would be terrified. She rose and crossed to him and took his face in her hands, the way she had come to do, the way that always made him go still. But I keep waiting to feel the fear, and instead I feel safe, chosen, protected in a way I've never been in my entire life. And I don't know what that says about me, Damiano. Maybe I'm as broken as you are. A small, wandering laugh. Maybe that's why it works. Two broken people who finally found the one other person who doesn't flinch. He turned his head and pressed a kiss into her palm. You're not broken, he said. You're the least broken person I've ever known. You save lives with these hands. You walked out of your father's empire and built yourself from nothing because you refused to be owned. You looked at everything I am, and you didn't run. He caught her wrist gently. If anyone in this room is broken, Elena, it was never you. On the 9th day it ended, the way Damiano had promised, not with a body, but with a phone call. Salvatore Genovese, having watched his money freeze and his shipments stop and his own men quietly defect, called the Rossi family and asked, in the careful language of a man who has understood he has lost, for terms. The terms were simple. Elena Marchetti was untouchable, now and forever. Her name would never again be spoken as a weapon. The Genovese would withdraw entirely from 3 territories as reparation, and Salvatore would live, would keep his diminished family, his reduced empire, his life, for exactly as long as he honoured the arrangement, and not 1 second longer. He agreed to all of it. He had no choice. And when he hung up the phone, in the back of his club in Brooklyn, Salvatore Genovese understood the thing he had failed to understand at the start, that a man in love is not a man with a wound. He is a man with something to lose, and therefore something to fight for. And there is nothing on this earth more dangerous than that. Matteo Rossi lost everything slowly, which was, in the end, a mercy he did not deserve and could not appreciate. He lost Elena first. Though he'd lost her the moment she dropped the ring on his floor, he simply hadn't understood it until she was truly gone, until the calls went unanswered and the flowers were turned away and the door he'd left unlocked stayed for the rest of his life, a door she would never walk through again. He lost the family's trust next. Word of what he'd done, the card debt, the phone call, the selling of Elena's name to the Genovese, moved through the Rossi world the way such things always did, quietly and completely. And Matteo watched the men who had laughed at his jokes and drunk his brother's wine begin to look through him as if he were furniture. He was not exiled. Damiano did not have him killed, though there were those on the council who quietly suggested it, and though Matteo would never know how close he'd come, or that it was his brother, the brother he'd betrayed, who had refused. He's a fool and a coward, Damiano had said, but he's my mother's son, and I won't put her boy in the ground. Strip him, leave him alive to understand what he threw away. That's punishment enough. So they stripped him. His allowance stopped. The apartment, the one where Elena had found him, the one his brother's money had paid for, was no longer his. The name that had opened every door in the city now closed them softly, one after another, until Matteo Rossi, who had never in his life had to build anything, found himself for the first time entirely without the walls his brother had built around him. He came to see Elena once, at the hospital of all places, in the lobby, 6 weeks after everything. He looked terrible, thinner, hollow-eyed, the easy charm worn off him like gilt off cheap metal. She almost didn't recognize the man she'd nearly married. "Elena," he stood when she came out. "Please, just 5 minutes." She could have refused. Security was already moving, but she held up a hand, and she looked at him. This man she had given 4 years of her life, and she found that she felt neither hatred nor love, only a distant, weary pity, the way you might feel for a stranger who had ruined himself. "5 minutes," she said. "Say what you came to say." "I'm sorry." His voice cracked. "I know it means nothing now. I know I threw it all away. You, the family, all of it. I didn't know what I had. Elena, I never once looked at you and saw what he saw. He knew. From the beginning. He knew what you were worth, and I—" He laughed, a wretched sound. "I had the most extraordinary woman in the city, and I treated her like a convenience. And now he has you, and he has everything, and I have nothing, and I finally understand what everyone was always trying to tell me." His eyes came up, desperate. "It's too late, isn't it?" "It was too late 4 years ago, Matteo," Elena said, not unkindly. "You just didn't notice until the bill came due." She studied him. "You want me to tell you that you're not a bad man, that you were just weak, just spoiled, just careless. And maybe that's true. But it doesn't matter, in the end, whether you were cruel or only careless. Carelessness with a person's heart does the same damage as cruelty. It just lets the careless person feel better about themselves afterward." He flinched. "I loved him, you know," she went on quietly. "Your brother. For a long time before I understood I did. Every time I felt safe, every time someone appeared exactly when I needed them, I thought it was you. And I built my whole idea of being loved around that feeling. And then I found out it was never you at all. It was always him, standing behind me, asking for nothing." She shook her head. "You didn't just betray me, Matteo. You spent 4 years taking credit for another man's love. That's the part I can't forgive. Not the woman in your bed, the stolen credit. You let me thank you all those years for things Damiano did in the dark." Matteo had no answer to that. There was none. "What will you do?" she asked, and there was that pity again, real and unwanted. "I don't know." He looked lost. "Work, I suppose. Actual work. I don't even know how to do anything. Dami always—" He stopped. "Dami always handled everything. My whole life. I never had to become anyone because he was always there to be everyone for me. A terrible, dawning grief. I resented him for it. Can you believe that? I resented him for holding me up. And the one time I tried to knock him down, I destroyed the only good thing either of us ever had." Elena looked at him for a long moment. "Then let this be the thing that makes you into someone," she said. "It's the only gift I have left to give you, and it's not really a gift. And you may hate me for it. But go and become a person, Matteo. Build something, fail at it and try again, and build something anyway, with your own hands, that no one gave you. It's the only thing that will ever make the emptiness stop. She turned to go, then paused. Your brother didn't kill you. He could have. The council wanted him to. He said you were your mother's son, and he wouldn't put you in the ground. She met his stunned eyes. He saved your life, Matteo. The same week you tried to ruin his. That's who he is. That's who you sold. I hope someday you're able to understand what that means. She walked away, and she did not look back. And Matteo Rossi stood alone in the lobby of a hospital, in a life he no longer recognized, and began, slowly, painfully, decades too late, to learn the only lesson he had ever needed. That you do not know the worth of a thing until you have thrown it away. Vincenzo Marchetti received them in his study, which occupied a corner of a townhouse on Fifth Avenue that Elena had grown up in and fled, and had not set foot in for 3 years. She stood in the doorway of her childhood home, with Damiano at her side, beside her, not behind, and she felt the old weight of the place settle on her, the crushing expectations, the gilded cage, the girl she'd been who was measured only by what she could be married into. And then her father rose from behind his desk, and he was older than she remembered, greyer, and he crossed the room and did something Vincenzo Marchetti had not done in 20 years. He put his arms around his daughter and held her. "Elena," he murmured into her hair. "My Elena, look at you. You're all right. You're truly all right." She held her formidable, terrifying billionaire father and felt him tremble, just slightly, and understood that the 3 years of silence had cost him as much as they'd cost her, and that his crime had never been that he didn't love her, only that he'd loved her in the language of ownership, which was the only language his world had ever taught him. "I'm all right, Papa," she said. "I'm all right." When they broke apart, Vincenzo turned to Damiano, and the two men regarded each other, the pharmaceutical king and the Mafia heir, two of the most dangerous men in the city, standing in a study over the woman they both loved in their different ways. "So," Vincenzo said, "the shadow." "Mr. Marchetti," Damiano said evenly. "Sit, both of you." Vincenzo returned to his desk and poured 3 glasses of something amber and older than Elena and pushed 2 of them across. He looked at Damiano for a long moment. "I've been trying to decide, for weeks now, what I would say to you when we finally met. The man who watched my daughter for years without my permission. The man who could have used her, ruined her, sold her 100 times over, and didn't." He turned the glass in his fingers. "I've built an empire on reading men correctly, Mr. Rossi, so let me read you, and you tell me if I'm wrong." "Go on," Damiano said. "You fell in love with my daughter when you were both children. You understood, even then, that your world would destroy her. So you did the hardest thing a young man can do. You let her go. You stepped back, and you spent the next decade standing between her and every danger she never knew existed, asking for nothing, expecting nothing, prepared to do it for the rest of your life without her ever knowing your name." Vincenzo's eyes were sharp. "You let your own brother take her, because you thought his shallow love was safer for her than your dangerous one. And you only stepped forward when he'd proven himself unworthy, and she'd already begun to see you on her own." A pause. "Have I read you correctly?" "Yes," Damiano said simply. "And now," Vincenzo continued, "you've refused to marry her fortune. You've told your own council you'd burn your empire before you'd use her as an asset. You've gone to war to keep her safe and taken nothing for yourself." He leaned back. "Do you know what that makes you, Mr. Rossi, in the reckoning of a man like me?" "I imagine you're about to tell me." "It makes you the only man I have ever met," Vincenzo said, "whom I would trust with my daughter's life. And I have met kings, Mr. Rossi, presidents, men who own more than you can imagine. Not one of them ever loved anything the way you love her, as an end and not a means." He raised his glass. "I spent her whole childhood trying to marry her into power. Suitor after suitor, alliance after alliance, and she hated me for it. And she was right to, because I was trying to buy her something I could never have bought at all." He looked at his daughter, and his eyes were wet. "She found it herself, in the last place I would ever have looked. A killer with a conscience. A shadow that turned out to be the safest place she's ever stood." Eleanor's throat was tight. "Papa, I have one question," Vincenzo said, turning back to Damiano, and his voice hardened into the thing that had made him a titan. "And your answer will determine whether you leave this house as a man I respect or a man I destroy. And make no mistake, Mr. Rossi, I can destroy you. I froze Salvatore Genovese's empire with a phone call, and I can freeze yours the same way." He set down his glass. "My daughter is not a Marchetti to you. She is not a fortune, or an alliance, or an asset. She is a woman you love. Swear it to me. Swear that if her name meant nothing, if there were no fortune, no empire, no advantage of any kind, swear you would love her exactly the same." Damiano did not hesitate. He did not even blink. "I loved her when she was nothing but a surgeon in a small apartment in Murray Hill," he said quietly. "I loved her when I thought her father was a memory she never spoke of, and her fortune didn't exist. I loved her when loving her could gain me absolutely nothing, when it cost me my brother, my peace, and 11 years of my life, and gave me nothing back but the knowledge that she was safe." He held Vincenzo's gaze, unflinching. "I don't love the Marchetti fortune, Mr. Marchetti. I've spent my whole life around fortunes. I love Eleanor. I would love her if she were penniless. I'd love her if the whole world forgot her name. She is not a means to anything. She's the only thing I've ever wanted that wasn't a means to something else." A pause. "So yes, I swear it." "On anything you like." The room was silent. And then Vincenzo Marchetti, who had spent 40 years learning to tell the difference between a man who wanted something from you and a man who wanted something for you, smiled. A real smile, the first Eleanor had seen on his face in longer than she could remember, and raised his glass a second time. "Welcome to the family, then," he said. "God help us all." For the first time in 11 years, Damiano Rossi had nothing to protect Eleanor from. It was a strange feeling, and it took him weeks to recognize it, this low, unfamiliar quiet where the vigilance used to be. The Genovese were broken and cowed. Her identity was no longer a weapon. Her father's alliance had seen to that, and the whole city now understood that to touch Eleanor Marchetti was to bring down the combined weight of the Rossi and Marchetti names. Matteo was gone into his slow reinvention. The council had accepted her. There were no more shadows to fight, and so, for the first time, Damiano was simply a man in love with a woman, with nothing standing between them, and he did not entirely know what to do with himself. "You keep watching the door," Elena observed one evening. They were in the penthouse, his, now theirs. She'd all but moved in without either of them ever quite discussing it, and she was reading on the sofa while he stood at the glass with a book he wasn't reading, his eyes returning again and again to the entrance. "Old habit," he admitted, setting the book down. 11 years of listening for the thing that might come through it. He turned to look at her, this woman on his sofa in the lamplight, barefoot, her hair loose, entirely his, and entirely at ease. "I don't know how to stop. I keep expecting the quiet to break." Elena set her own book aside and patted the cushion beside her. He crossed the room and sat, and she curled into him, and he wrapped an arm around her, the way a man holds something he spent his whole life afraid to break. "It doesn't have to break," she said softly. "That's the thing you never got to learn, isn't it? That the quiet is allowed to just stay. That you can put the weapon down and nothing bad happens." She traced a slow line along his forearm, over an old scar he'd never explained and she'd never asked about. "You've spent so long being the wall that keeps the danger out that you never got to stand inside the house you were protecting." He was quiet for a long moment. "When I was a boy," he said finally, in the low voice he used only with her, the one no one else in the world would ever hear, "my father used to say that a Rossi man doesn't get to be happy. He gets to be strong, and he gets to be feared, and if he does his job well enough, the people he loves get to be happy in his place. That was the whole of it. You bleed so they don't have to. You watch so they can sleep." He looked at her. "I believed it. For 30 years I believed it. I thought my entire purpose was to stand in the dark so you could live in the light, and I made my peace with never crossing over. And now? And now you keep pulling me into the light," he said, "and I keep discovering that I'm allowed to be here, that I don't have to earn you by suffering, that I can just—" He stopped, and something in his throat worked. "That I can just love you and be loved back, and that it doesn't have to cost anyone anything." He shook his head slowly. "No one ever told me that was allowed. I'm 40% certain it's a trick, and the bill is still coming." Elena laughed, a real, warm, surprised laugh, and pressed a kiss to his jaw. "The bill already came, Damiano," she said. "You paid it. You paid it for 11 years, in the dark, without ever asking me to help carry it. This," she gestured at the quiet room, the lamplight, the two of them, "this isn't the trick. This is the thing you bought. This is what all that suffering was for. You just have to let yourself have it." He held her tighter. They fell into a rhythm in those weeks, the strange, unhurried rhythm of ordinary happiness, which was more foreign to both of them than any war. Elena went to the hospital and saved lives with her hands, and Damiano learned, slowly, to let her go each morning without following, to trust the security he'd arranged and the alliance he'd forged, and the simple, radical idea that she could walk through the world safely without him watching every step. It was the hardest thing he had ever done, and he did it for her, because she'd asked, because beside me, not behind, had turned out to mean this too, trusting her enough to let her out of his sight. In the evenings, she came home to the penthouse and told him about her day, the surgeries won and lost, the patients on her list. And he listened the way he did everything, completely, silently, wholly present. And she found that being truly listened to was its own kind of intimacy, one Matteo had never once given her in 4 years. And sometimes, late at night, she would wake and find him at the window, looking out over the city, and she understood without asking that some part of him would always be the shadow, always be watching, always be standing between her and the dark. She had made her peace with it. It was not a flaw to be fixed. It was simply who he was, a man who loved so fiercely that vigilance was his native tongue. She would go to him at the glass and slip her arms around him from behind and rest her cheek against his back, and after a while he would relax into her, and they would stand there together looking out at the city, and the watching would become something they did as two instead of one. "Tell me something," she said one of those nights, "something you've never told anyone." He was quiet for a long time. "The night you found Matteo," he said finally. "The night it all came apart. I knew the moment it happened. My people told me, and I stood right here at this window with a phone in my hand, and I wanted so badly to come to you that I could barely breathe." His hand covered hers where it rested on his chest. "But I didn't. I told myself you'd never believe me, that you'd see your fiancé's brother come to gloat. So I stood here instead, and I watched the lights of your building across the city, and I thought, she's over there, in the dark, alone, breaking, and the one person who would burn down the world for her is standing at a window a mile away, too much of a coward to cross it." His voice was raw. "I have done a great many hard things in my life, Elena. Standing at this window that night, not going to you, I think it was the hardest." Elena turned him around to face her. "You didn't need to cross it that night," she said gently, "because I crossed it instead. 11 days later, when I lost that patient, and there was only one number in the world I wanted to call, I crossed it, Damiano. I came to you." She smiled up at him. "You spent 11 years teaching me I was safe, without ever letting me see the teacher. And then, right when I needed it most, some part of me already knew where to run. You built that, in the dark, without me ever knowing." She rose up and kissed him, slow and certain. "So stop calling it cowardice. You didn't have to cross the distance that night. You'd already spent 11 years making sure I'd know the way across it myself." He looked at her as though she'd handed him something he'd been searching for his whole life. "How do you do that?" he murmured. "Take the worst thing I've ever done to myself and turn it into the best thing I've ever done for you." "Practice," she said. "I've got a lifetime of it planned." It was Elena who insisted they go back to the hospital gala. It was the same event, the same charity, the same ballroom where 4 years earlier a stranger had cornered her and a shadow had broken 2 of his fingers in a service corridor while she'd smiled obliviously at the wrong brother. She wanted to go back. She wanted to stand in that room again, on Damiano's arm this time, and rewrite the memory, to close the loop that had started everything. It's not safe, was his first instinct, of course. Public, crowded, predictable. Everyone knows you'll be there. Everyone knows I'm untouchable now, she countered. You made sure of that. My father made sure of that. You said it yourself. No one in this city would dare. She fixed him with a look. You have to let me have my life, Damiano. The real one, out in the open. That was the whole promise. Beside you, not behind. I want to walk into that ballroom on your arm and let the entire city see that the shadow finally stepped into the light. He could deny her nothing. He had never been able to deny her anything, which was why he'd spent 11 years denying himself instead. So they went. She wore deep red and he wore black, and when they walked into the ballroom together, the room did the thing rooms did when Damiano Rossi entered them. The small, involuntary hush, the recalibration, the awareness rippling outward. But this time it was doubled, because on his arm was Elena Marchetti, whose name every powerful person in that room now knew, and the whispers that followed them were not the whispers of danger, but of legend. The shadow and the surgeon, the heir and the heiress, the man who refused a fortune for love. Their story had gotten out in the way such stories did. It had become, in the telling and retelling of a city that ran on gossip and power, a kind of myth. And Elena found she didn't mind. Let them tell it. It was true in all the ways that mattered. They danced. Damiano danced the way he did everything, with a controlled precision that only she could feel the tension beneath, the vigilance he would never fully shed, even here, even now, even with her in his arms, in a room he'd swept for threats 3 times before they arrived. But as the music played and she rested her head against his chest, she felt him slowly, slowly relax, felt the wall come down inch by inch, felt him become, for a few minutes in the middle of a crowded ballroom, simply a man dancing with the woman he loved. 4 years ago, she murmured against him, I stood in this room and I felt someone watching me. On the back of my neck, all night. I told myself it was nerves. She tilted her head up to look at him. It was you, wasn't it? You were here. I was here, he admitted, against the far wall, in the shadows where I always stood. I watched you all night. I watched a man approach you outside and I dealt with him. And then I watched my brother walk up and take the credit, and I stood against that wall and told myself it was better this way. His arms tightened around her. I never dreamed I'd ever be in the middle of this room, holding you, with everyone watching. I couldn't have imagined it. It would have felt like a fairy tale, and men like me don't get fairy tales. Men like you, Eleanor said, get exactly the endings they're brave enough to reach for. You just spent 11 years being brave about the wrong thing, brave enough to suffer, not brave enough to hope. She smiled. You've gotten better at hoping. I've had a good teacher. Across the ballroom, unseen by them, a man watched from the edge of the crowd, and for a moment the old story threatened to repeat itself. The stranger at the gala, the shadow, the danger. But this stranger was only a journalist, and this danger only curiosity. And when Enzo materialized at his elbow, Enzo, who was here, of course, who would always be here, and murmured a few quiet words, the man simply nodded and put his notebook away and left. And the loop that had started 4 years ago closed for good. Not with violence this time, but with a word. Elena felt Damiano's attention flicker toward the exchange and back, the eternal watchfulness, and she pressed closer. "Stay here," she said, "with me, in the room. Let Enzo watch the doors. That's what he's for. You—" She reached up and touched his face. "You're for me tonight. Just for me. Just dancing. Can you do that?" She watched him make the choice, watched the shadow instinct war with the promise he'd made her, and watched, with something like awe, as he chose her, as he let his shoulders drop and his eyes stop scanning and his whole terrible vigilance fold itself away, and gave her the one thing he'd never given anyone in his entire life, his undivided, undefended, unguarded self. "For you," he said quietly. "Just dancing. For the rest of the night. And for the rest of my life, if you'll have it." And then, because he was still Damiano, still a man who had waited 11 years and was done with waiting, he stopped dancing in the middle of the floor, in front of the entire city, and reached into his pocket. Elena's breath caught. "Damiano!" "I've stood behind you for 11 years, he said, low, only for her, though the whole room had gone still and was watching now. "I've watched over you from the dark. I've protected a life I wasn't part of, blessed a love that wasn't mine, and asked for nothing, because I told myself I had no right to want anything." He opened the small box in his hand, and inside it was not the platinum ring Matteo had chosen, something else, something old, something that had clearly been waiting a very long time. "This was my grandmother's. My grandfather refused an empire to marry her. I've carried it since I was 17 years old, since the day I decided I could never have you, because I couldn't bear to let it go, even when I'd given up hope. I've had 11 years to ask you this, and I never once thought I'd get the chance." His voice, for once, was not steady at all. "Marry me, Elena. Not the heiress, not the alliance. You. Just you. The way I've always loved you. For nothing and for everything." And Elena Marchetti, who had run her whole life from men who wanted to own her, looked at the one man who had only ever wanted to keep her safe, and gave him the only answer her heart had ever intended. "Yes," she said. "Come out of the shadow, Damiano. Yes." They were married in the spring, in a small ceremony that the whole dangerous world of the city nonetheless found a way to attend, because a wedding between the Rossi heir and the Marchetti heiress was not a thing anyone with any sense would miss. But the wedding is not the part of the story worth telling. The part worth telling came 3 weeks before it, on a grey afternoon when the past came knocking one final time, and Damiano and Elena learned together what it costs to live in the light instead of the shadow. It came in the form of Matteo. He had been gone for months, into the wilderness of his own reinvention, working, actually working, at a job his brother's name did not open, and his own hands had to earn. Elena had heard second-hand that he was struggling, and that he had not once asked for help, which was more than she'd expected of him. But she had not seen him since the hospital lobby, and she did not expect to see him now, standing in the rain outside the penthouse tower, looking up at the windows the way his brother had once looked up at hers. Enzo brought word first. "The younger Rossi is downstairs," he said, his face carefully neutral. "Alone, unarmed. He's asking to see you both. Says he'll wait in the rain all night if he has to. A pause. Your call, boss. Damiano looked at Elena. It was, wordlessly, her decision as much as his. The man had wronged them both. Let him up, Elena said. Matteo came into the penthouse, dripping and thin, and changed in a way that went deeper than the weight he'd lost. The charm was gone entirely now, and in its place was something Elena had never seen on him before. A kind of quiet. He looked at his brother, and at Elena beside him. Beside him, always beside him now, and he did not flinch from either of them. I'm not here to ask for anything, Matteo said. I want that clear before I say anything else. I don't want money. I don't want back in. I've spent 6 months learning to live without either, and it turns out I can, which surprised me more than anyone. He drew a breath. I came to say 2 things, and then I'll go, and I won't trouble either of you again unless you want me to. Say them, Damiano said. His voice was not warm, but it was not cold either. It was something in between, the voice of a man addressing a brother he had grieved. Matteo turned to Elena first. I'm sorry. Not the way I said it before, in the lobby, when I was still sorry mostly for myself. I understand now what I did. Not just the cheating. That was cruelty enough, and you deserved none of it. But the other thing. The thing you named, that I couldn't hear at the time. His voice thickened. I took credit for his love. For 4 years. Every time he saved you and let me stand in front of it, I let you thank me. And I never once wondered why you were thanking me for things I hadn't done. He shook his head. That's the thing I can't undo, and the thing I'm most ashamed of. Not the woman in my bed. The stolen years of your gratitude. You were right. It was the worst of it. Elena was quiet for a moment. Then she nodded once. It was not forgiveness, exactly. It was acknowledgement, which was sometimes all that could honestly be offered. Matteo turned to his brother, and this was clearly the harder of the two. You saved my life, he said. The council wanted me dead. I know that now. Someone told me months ago. They wanted me in the ground for what I did, and you refused. You said I was our mother's son. His composure cracked, finally, the old easy face crumbling into something real. I spent my whole life resenting you, Dammy, for being stronger, for holding me up, for being the wall I never had to become. And the one time I struck at you, He couldn't finish. He tried again. You held me up one more time, even then, even after everything I did to you and to her. You reached out and kept me from falling, and you didn't even let me know you'd done it. You just did it, in the dark, the way you do everything. He wiped his face roughly. That's who you are. That's who I sold to a card player for $40,000. I understand now what I threw away. Not the family, not the money. You. A brother who would save my life the same week I tried to end his. The room was silent, except for the rain. Damiano crossed to his brother slowly. Elena watched, her heart in her throat, unsure what he would do, this cold, dangerous man who had lost so much to Matteo's weakness. He put his hand on the back of Matteo's neck. the way brothers do, the way their father must have once done to them, and he pulled him forward until their foreheads nearly touched. "You were always weak," Damiano said quietly. "But you were never evil. I knew the difference. That's why you're still breathing." He drew back and looked his brother in the eye. "You've spent 6 months becoming someone. I can see it on you. Keep going. Become someone all the way, Matteo. Not the man who lived in my shadow. Someone who casts his own." A pause, and then, almost gently, "And then come to the wedding. You're my brother. Our mother would want you there. Come, and stand up straight, and be someone I'd be proud to call blood." His voice roughened. "That's the last thing I'll ever give you for free. After that, you earn your place. All right?" Matteo nodded, unable to speak, and the two brothers stood there a moment longer in the rainlight, something old and broken between them, not healed exactly, but no longer bleeding. When Matteo had gone, Elena came to Damiano's side and slipped her hand into his. "You gave him another chance," she said softly, "after everything." "I gave him a door," Damiano corrected. "Whether he walks through it is his to decide. I'm done carrying him, but I won't be the one who locks it." He looked down at her. "You taught me that. The door left open, no strings, no price. You never called that number I left you, not for 11 days. But I never regretted leaving the door open." He raised her hand and kissed it. "It's the only kind of love worth giving. The kind that leaves the door open and asks for nothing and trusts the person to find their own way across." On the night of their wedding, when the guests had gone and the dangerous, glittering world had folded itself back into the city, Damiano took Elena up to the roof of the penthouse. It was late. The city spread out below them the way it always had, a field of light stretching to the black rivers on either side, beautiful and cruel and entirely indifferent to the two small figures on the balcony above it. The air was cool with spring. Somewhere far below, sirens rose and faded. The world went on, being the world. Elena still wore her wedding dress. Damiano had shed his jacket and stood at the railing with his sleeves rolled and his tie loosened, and for once, for the first time she could remember, there was no vigilance in his posture at all, no scanning the dark, no listening for the thing that might come. Just a man looking out over a city with his wife beside him. "This is the place," he said quietly. She came to stand next to him. "What place?" "This roof." He didn't look at her. He looked out at the city, at some specific point in it she couldn't identify. "Do you see that building? Past the park. The one with the copper roof, third from the water." She followed his gaze and found it, an ordinary tower among 1,000 towers. "That was your building, your old apartment in Murray Hill. You can see your window from here, if you know exactly where to look. The corner one, 6th floor." Elena went very still. "I used to come up here," Damiano said, "at night, after everything was handled, after the family business was done, after the world was as safe as I could make it. I'd come up here, and I'd stand right here, at this railing, and I'd look at that window." His voice was low and even, but she heard everything underneath it. 11 years of it. "Sometimes your light was on. I'd know you were awake, reading or working late on a case. Sometimes it was dark, and I'd know you were sleeping, and I'd think, she's safe. She's asleep. She doesn't know I'm here, and she never will, and that's exactly how it should be. I'd stand here and watch a window a mile away and tell myself it was enough. He finally turned to look at her, and his eyes in the city light were unguarded, wet. It was never enough. But it was all I let myself have. This railing and that window and the distance in between. Elena's throat closed. She thought of all those nights, how many, hundreds, that she had lain in that sixth-floor apartment, believing herself alone in the world, unloved, unwatched, ordinary. And a mile away, on a roof she'd never known existed, a man had stood in the dark and loved her across the distance and asked for nothing, ever. All those years, she whispered, I felt so alone. I thought no one was watching. I thought no one... Her voice broke. And you were up here the whole time, watching my window, keeping me safe, and I never knew. You were never supposed to know. He reached out and brushed a tear from her cheek with his thumb, impossibly gentle for hands that had done such violence. That was the whole point. Love that asks to be seen isn't really love. It's just a transaction wearing love's clothes. I wanted to love you the way you love a thing you'll never possess, completely, silently, for its own sake. A faint, wondering smile. I never imagined I'd be standing here on this exact roof on the night I married you, telling you about it. This was supposed to stay my secret until I died. The distance was supposed to be permanent. Elena turned to face him fully. She took both his hands in hers, the hands that had guarded her, fought for her, killed for her, and never once reached for her without permission. Come here, she said softly. She drew him to the railing, to the exact spot he must have stood 100 nights, and she positioned him there, facing out toward that distant window. And then she stepped in front of him, her back to the city, so that he was looking at her and not at the ghost of the girl in the sixth-floor apartment. You don't have to watch the window anymore, she said. She's not there. That girl who didn't know she was loved. She's gone. She found out. She turned around. She lifted his hands and pressed them flat against her own heart so he could feel it beating, warm and alive and here, no longer a mile away in the dark. I'm right here, Damiano. Not across the city, not behind a window, not a light you watch from a distance and hope is safe. I'm here, close enough to touch. You don't have to stand at a distance anymore. You never have to stand at a distance again. He looked at her for a long time, and she watched 11 years of longing finally set itself down. Watched the shadow man learn in real time that the thing he'd loved from afar for a decade was standing warm and willing in the circle of his own arms, and that he was allowed to hold it, and that no bill was coming, and that this was simply, impossibly, his life now. I don't know how to be this close, he admitted, barely a whisper. I've loved you from a distance for so long, I don't know how to love you from here. Then we'll learn together, she said. You taught me I was safe without ever letting me see you. Now let me teach you that you're allowed to be seen. She rose up on her toes, the city glittering behind her, that distant window dark and forgotten. No more shadows, Damiano. No more watching from the roof. From now on, Wherever you look for me. She smiled, and it was the smile that had undone him in a library 11 years ago. I'll already be right there beside you. He pulled her against him then and kissed her, and there was nothing careful in it and nothing guarded, only a man, finally, fully, home. Above them the sky was clear for once, and the city burned below in all its dangerous light. And on the roof, where a lonely man had once stood, watching a window a mile away, that same man now held his wife in his arms and looked at nothing at all but her. The distance was gone. He had spent 11 years being the shadow behind her, guarding a light he believed he could never touch. And now the light had turned around and reached for him and pulled him out of the dark. And Damiano Rossi, head of one of the most powerful families in America, cold and ruthless and obsessed and utterly, hopelessly in love, discovered that after a lifetime of standing behind the woman he loved, the finest place in all the world to stand was simply, at last, beside her. Below them, the window in the distant building stayed dark. He never needed to watch it again.